All right, hi everyone. This is lecture video 16. So this is actually our last video for the semester. So in this video, we will finish up the information for exam 4 by talking about the rest of the slides on motivation. So remember with exam 4 that there will be a review video and a practice exam to help you prepare. And then after you take exam 4, the only thing that's left for you to be thinking about is the final exam or exam 5. So the final exam is going to be kind of a take-home open note sort of thing. What I mean by that is that it will be open in Canvas and you can go in, work on it, save it, come back to it. So this will be different from our other exams. There won't be a specific timer running. Just make sure that you submit it by the time that it closes. So the exam will be made up of essay questions where you can type in your thoughts there, save it, come back and work on it. As long as you submit it by the deadline, you should be good. So let me know if you have any questions, and I hope that you have enjoyed the class. You guys take care. Alright, so as I said, today we're going to be finishing the material on motivation. So we talked during our last video about some different perspectives on motivation, and we ended up talking about extrinsic or external motivation versus intrinsic or internal motivation. Today we're going to be talking about some other issues that can come up in the classroom related to motivation. And first of all, we're going to be talking about a concept of flow. Now, basically, when we say flow, we're talking about an ideal situation where the student would be most likely to have the proper level of motivation. So I have a little chart here. You're going to see that there are two things that are important. First of all, the student's perceived level of their own skill. Now, notice that this says perceived level. So this is the student's perception. Some students will have accurate perceptions where they really accurately understand how much skill they have in a particular academic area. There may be some students who have academic ability, but they don't perceive it that way. They feel like they're not capable. And there may be some students who have kind of an inflated view of their academic abilities. So this is the perception that the student has of their own level of skill. And then in addition, we also have the student's perception of the level of challenge. So this is what the student feels in the classroom. Am I being appropriately challenged? Now what you'll see here is that if a student feels like he or she has low skill, and the student feels like the expectation or the challenge is low, then we have a student who really is experiencing apathy here. This is a situation where a student does not have confidence, does not feel capable, but at the same time, well, you're not asking me to do a whole lot. This student will probably not feel motivated to do better because you're not expecting much of them, and also because the student probably won't feel like they're capable of doing any better. On the other hand, what happens when a student perceives that they have very, high academic skills, and yet they perceive that the challenge is low? This is a student that maybe feels like he or she could do so much more, but no one is expecting them to. This student is probably bored. Now, this could be a situation where genuinely the teacher is not challenging the student enough, and that could be the case. Because sometimes, unfortunately, we have to teach to the average level of intelligence or the average level of understanding in a classroom and may not be able to provide extra challenges to the more gifted students. Or it could be a situation where a student is being appropriately challenged by the teacher, but the student's perception of their own skill may be a little bit inaccurate here. On the other hand, we could have a situation where the student believes that they're not capable. So their perception of their own skill is low, but they perceive that they are being challenged excessively, and this is going to cause anxiety. Once again, not the ideal motivational setting here. I feel like a small amount of anxiety can motivate you, but excessive anxiety paralyzes you, so probably not good here. This can happen in a situation where a student's skill truly is low, or just where a student doesn't have confidence in skills. And then they feel as though there's no way for them to be capable. There's no way for them to meet the challenge, meet expectations. So obviously, apathy, boredom, and anxiety, that's not really what we're going for. We're going for flow here. We want a student to have a high level of perceived skill and to have a high level of perceived challenge. Now, what's important to note here is that we want the student's perceptions to be accurate as well. What we don't want to do is take a student who truly does not have skills and then build up their confidence. And unfortunately, some of the research studies that I've read on education in America make this mistake. Sometimes we see that students, I read one study in particular where compared with students from other countries, the students from the United States were most confident in their scores, but they had the lowest scores compared to other countries. So what we don't want to do is provide false confidence. We want our students to perceive that their level of skill is high because their level of skill truly is high. We're just paying attention to not only teaching the skill, but also making sure that the student feels good about achieving those skills, and then making sure that we're giving a high level of challenge or appropriate level of challenge. So flow occurs when students develop a sense of mastery, hopefully because they truly have mastered the material, and when they feel like they are being challenged at an appropriate level. So how are we going to try to achieve this? Well, one thing to think about is that flow may be different for one student than it is for the next student. So we're trying to match the level of challenge with the level of skill for the student. And this is difficult in a large classroom setting when you have many different students, but one way to do this would be to have students set goals that are challenging but reasonable, personal goals. This is going to come up again later in the lecture. There are several different benefits to having students have personal goals that are challenging but reasonable. If the goals are too easy, then we're not actually doing anything really. We could be doing so much more. But if our goals are too high, we'll never meet them and we'll feel discouraged and frustrated. So helping each student set reasonable goals, removing any kind of distraction, anything that keeps a student from mastering the material is going to harm their ability to be motivated in the classroom. And then raising their confidence at an appropriate level. So we want our students to feel confident in their abilities because they have those abilities. So we want to encourage our students not to be afraid of trying a new task, not to be afraid of maybe failing the first time and learning from that failure. All right, now part of your motivation has to do with attributions. And basically when I use the word attribution, I'm talking about your understanding of the cause of something. So this is a topic that comes up in social psychology when we try to understand why people behave the way they do. It's a topic that comes up in abnormal psychology when we try to understand things like depression. But attribution theory basically says that a person is motivated to discover the underlying causes of their own behavior or the behavior of other people. So basically what we're saying here is that when you engage in a behavior, or when you see someone else engage in a behavior, you try to understand why they're doing what they're doing. You could be wrong, but you're going to make an attribution. You're going to make a hypothesis about why a person is behaving a certain way. So your attribution could be internal or external, could be stable or unstable, and could be controllable or uncontrollable. Now let me explain what I mean by this. First of all, with this locus, we're talking about internal versus external. So when you do a certain behavior or when you have a certain level of performance, you will either say that that happened because of internal factors, something about who you are, or external factors, something about the environment. So for example, let's say that you aced a test. You made 100 on a test. You could make an internal attribution and say, I'm a smart person. I am a studious person. I did the work. I earned the grade. It happened because of me. Or you could make an external attribution and you could say, well, I just got lucky. I was just guessing. The teacher made the test too easy. You could say that it's something outside of you that caused that. Now, your grade is the same, but your perception of the situation is different depending on your attribution. Also, stability is really basically referring to the idea, is this going to continue to happen? So if you make 100 on a test and you have a stable attribution, you're thinking to yourself, yeah, I'm going to continue to ace these tests. If you have an unstable attribution, you might say, well, I'm glad I made a good grade that time, but there's no telling what will happen next time. So this is your understanding of whether you will continue to have the same outcome or not. And then as far as controllability goes, Do you feel like you're in control of whether you continue to have the same outcome or not? Is it something, and this kind of ties in with the other two about it being internal or external, about being stable or unstable, but do you feel like this was in your control? So let's take the opposite situation. Let's say that you took a test and it did not go well and your score was pretty low. Your understanding of controllability here, you'll ask yourself the question, okay, could I have done better? Was there something I could have controlled here to make this go better? And this goes along with maybe an internal attribution. Maybe I didn't study well enough. So that's internal. It was my fault, but it's controllable. I can change that next time, right? Or if you don't do well and you say, well, I didn't do well because I'm not a smart person. Well, that's saying that it's internal, it's my fault, but it's not really controllable. Maybe the person doesn't feel like he or she has any control over level of intelligence. So if you feel like you failed because of external factors, you'll probably be angry. If you feel like it was the teacher's fault, or you feel like it was your classmate's fault, or your roommate kept you up all night and you couldn't sleep and so you were tired, whatever, you'll probably be angry. On the other hand, if you feel like this was something you could have controlled, I could have done something different and had a better outcome, then you may feel guilty about that. Now, as I said, your attribution is not always accurate. Sometimes we think something is internal when it's really external, or vice versa. But see how this is related to motivation. If you feel like your grade was low because you didn't try hard enough, and you feel like though you could control this, this is not necessarily stable, this is in my control, I can do better next time, that student will probably do better next time, will be motivated to try to fix the problem. If you have a student that did not do well on a test and they feel like, well, it's my fault, but there's nothing I can do about it, they probably won't do better next time. Or if they blame it on someone else, well, it's not my fault, so-and-so made me do poorly, then they probably won't do better next time either because they're probably not fixing the underlying problem. So your attribution is very closely related to your motivation. And I mentioned this being related to depression. A person who is depressed will view negative life events as being internal and stable and controllable. So I caused this bad thing to happen. Bad things will always happen. I could have stopped it and I didn't. Versus on the other hand, when a good thing happens, a person who's depressed might say, well, this was external. I didn't cause the good thing to happen. It's unstable. It's not likely to happen again. It's out of my control. I can't make it happen. So you can see how your attributions really impact the way you think about yourself and the world. So a few example questions here. James believes he did well on a test because he was lucky. Okay? Well, he's probably happy that he did well on the test. But if he feels like it was luck that determined his grade, luck is external, first of all. You don't control luck. If you believe in luck, luck is external. Also, it's unstable. We know that sometimes you feel lucky and sometimes you feel unlucky, so it's probably unstable and probably uncontrollable. You can't make yourself be lucky. Steve believes he did poorly on a test because he is stupid. I don't like this word, stupid, but he's not intelligent or whatever. All right, now this probably feels internal because it feels like it's his level of intelligence that caused the outcome. It probably feels pretty stable. He may not feel like he has the ability to improve his intelligence. Unless he has a teacher behind him encouraging him. And it may feel like it's out of his control. So in this particular situation, Steve may not do well next time if this is how he feels about himself and about the situation. Also may become depressed. Sally believes she did poorly on a test because she didn't study enough. Okay, this situation is internal because it was Sally who created the outcome. It was her behavior. She didn't study enough. That's internal. But that doesn't have to be stable. Sally could say to herself, okay, I didn't do well because I didn't study, and that's my fault, but I can control that. It's controllable and unstable. So next time I will put forth the effort. I'll get a different outcome because I can control the amount of studying I do. So Sally, with this mindset, may do better on the next test because she tries harder. Sandra believes she did poorly in a class because the teacher doesn't like her. So first of all, this would be external because she's thinking that the outcome is associated with another person, not with her. Now, it depends a little bit on Sandra's viewpoint here as far as the other things are going. She may feel like this is stable, teacher doesn't like me, and that's maybe uncontrollable. I can't do anything about that. Or she might approach it a different way and say, well, then I need to make the teacher like me. And she might feel like this is unstable and controllable. I can change this by doing something to make the teacher like me. I would encourage Sandra to be cautious here to make sure that there's not any other factors that might potentially be impacting her grade, and to talk to the teacher about it, because this may be a situation that could be resolved. All right, so we're talking about issues that impact a person's motivation, and your mindset is very important to your motivation. Basically, when we use the term mindset, we're talking about your cognitive view of yourself, the way you think about yourself. Now, we could go into great detail here about several different aspects of mindset, but a couple that are especially important here. Do you have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? You'll see this. You'll see this in yourself. You'll see this in your students. You'll see this in other people. A fixed mindset means that a person feels like whatever he or she is what he or she will be. So this person probably feels like there's not a good chance of anything changing. Now, if you're an intelligent person with a fixed mindset, this might be okay for you. You might feel confident, okay? I'm a smart person and nothing's going to change that. Okay? But imagine the person who feels like he or she is not intelligent or not skilled or not capable, and they feel like they can't change that. What kind of motivation will that person have? If, for example, let's say that a person has a fixed mindset about their math abilities. I'm not good at math. I don't like math. Math doesn't like me. It's a mutual hatred. And they feel like there's nothing they can do. How will that student approach math? Probably that student will run away from math as much as possible. But when forced to approach math, probably won't take a very helpful approach. May start to have a helpless orientation where they give up completely. And in that situation, they will have a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you believe something is true, you behave in ways that make it true sometimes. So if you believe that you cannot be successful at math, then you won't put forth the effort, and therefore you will not be successful at math. And you can tell yourself, see, I knew all along that was what was going to happen. On the other hand, we can have a growth mindset. This is the idea that we can change and improve through effort. This person will likely be motivated because they feel capable of improvement. Now, one thing I want to say, we talk about intelligence, and we've had some lectures on intelligence and intelligence testing. And we think of intelligence as being a stable concept, and it is true, intelligence is a relatively stable concept. However, there are things that you can do to improve your intelligence. Remember that intelligence is generally referring to your overall potential to learn. It's not so much about learning facts, but your ability to learn. When I was doing intelligence testing in grad school, when we had a subject come in, a client come in, and we did an IQ test, we gave them a list of recommendations to help improve on their areas of weakness. If it was not possible to improve your intelligence, then I would just test for it until, hey, okay, your working memory's awful, sorry about your bad luck, have a good day. No, we gave some advice. We gave some recommendations about ways to improve that. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of encouragement that even for things that are very stable, we would like to have our students, and we'd like to ourselves keep an open mind and feel like we can master that area with enough work and help from competent others. Very good. In addition to your mindset, self-efficacy, really it refers to your confidence, basically. Or do you feel like you are capable of achieving the goals that you have set for yourself? So when we're talking about several different issues today, goal setting is important, and you'll see this included here. You have to help students develop short and long-term goals. You need to help your students form goals that are appropriate, though. If you help your students come up with appropriate goals, then they'll have self-efficacy because they'll be able to achieve those goals. They'll feel good about themselves. If students set goals that are too difficult, that they'll never be able to reach, then their self-efficacy will plummet. So we want to make sure that we are appropriately challenging our students. Now, when we're talking about goals, why do we set short and long-term goals? Why not just long-term goals? I've mentioned before that I worked with students who had some anger issues, junior high students, and working on things like emotional control, problem solving, decision making, that kind of thing. And a big part of that program involved setting goals. Well, the students were usually able to identify a long-term goal, but they weren't sure how to identify the short-term goals necessary to get there. So, for example, a student might say, well, I want to be a professional athlete. Okay, that's a great long-term goal. But when you're in 8th grade and you want to be a professional athlete, there are many, many steps along the way that you need to take. And so there are short-term goals as well. Why do you set those short-term goals? Well, first of all, they help you stay on the path to your long-term goals. They help you get there. But also, if you set a goal that you can only reach in 10 years, you'll lose your motivation. You need to have some little successes along the way. You don't need to wait 10 years to get your reinforcement. That would be like me saying, I want to go run a marathon and I'll reinforce myself when I run a marathon, but I haven't been exercising in the last 10 years. That's not going to work. So you have to set both long-term goals and short-term goals to help you get there. And you need to teach students the strategies they need to be able to meet those goals. So if a student is not able to meet the goals they set, they'll feel frustrated, they'll feel disappointed. You are there to help them meet their goals. And they may need some new strategies. They may need some new time management. They may need some new study tips. They may need someone just encouraging them. And making sure that students are not overly aroused or anxious. So a student that is very emotional about the goals they're trying to set, that might actually be a hindrance. And we see this sometimes with certain types of students. And we're going to talk about certain types of students towards the end of this set of slides. Some students are more perfectionists, or some students have parents that are really strongly pushing them, like, you need to make this grade, you need to get this scholarship, you need to go to this college. And so trying to help ease that pressure, trying to reduce that anxiety, will make students feel more confident in their abilities to meet their goals. So providing support, positive adult and peer models, if at all possible, helping students feel like they can set goals and meet those goals will build their self-efficacy and their self-regulation. On a related note, you need to have self-control to be able to meet your goals. So sometimes students can set really great goals, but they can't make themselves do those little things they have to do. Like the student that wants to have a 4.0 in college, but doesn't go to class, or doesn't take notes, or doesn't ask questions, that kind of thing. Sometimes students have the right goals, but they don't have the self-control necessary to engage in the behaviors that will help them accomplish those goals. So how do you help your students start to develop some self-regulation? So goal setting is helpful here as well. Students will maybe feel motivated to learn those behaviors and engage in those behaviors if they feel like it's helping them, especially if the goals are personal. Not a goal that their parents have set for them, or a goal that you as the teacher have set for them. Now, when you ask a student about their goals, you may think to yourself, I don't know that that's going to happen. I mean, professional athlete, that's a fantastic goal, but there's a very low percentage of people who want to be a professional athlete who actually end up becoming professional athletes. You don't necessarily have to tell the student that at the time. You want them to stay motivated. Help them to set goals that they feel are relevant to their life. Once you do that, look for what's working and what's not working in their goal acquisition. Are they actually achieving their goals? Are they managing their time effectively? Now, first of all, before you can teach someone else how to set priorities and be organized, you've got to learn how to set priorities and be organized yourself. And that's tricky. I understand that. Something to work on. Maybe we're all a work in progress here. But helping students learn when to start studying and how to study, how to take notes, how to approach someone if there is a problem, the appropriate way to handle a problem, that kind of thing. Monitor their expectations and their progress towards their goals, and help them get back on track if they drift off. Knowing that this will probably happen. We all have this where life gets difficult sometimes and we stop doing what we need to be doing, or Maybe our goals shift or feel more or less important to us at different time periods, helping the students stay on track, being the student's cheerleader here. All right, now when we're talking about issues related to motivation, here's a debate for you. Should teachers help students who struggle by giving them assignments they can easily accomplish? So we're saying here's a student who is losing motivation because he or she is not successful. Should we give them an assignment that is maybe easier than what their classmates are doing? And then when they complete that assignment and make a good grade on it, they'll feel encouraged and then maybe able to tackle more difficult tasks. Obviously, this is a difficult question, and you can see both sides of this. On the one hand, if you have a student who is struggling and you're working with the student on their skills, because this is not going to help if you perpetually give the student easier assignments but don't ever help them build their skill level, this is not going to work. But if we're saying that we're doing this on occasion to provide encouragement so that the student can then engage with you on skill building, then we can see how that could be effective. Continuing to give a student tasks that they cannot accomplish is obviously going to squash the student's motivation. So this is a question of, do I have flow going on here? The student's perceived level of skill seems, to the student at least, perhaps, or maybe truly is, their skill's a little bit lower, and our expectations may be slightly too high. So I would say this is something that you would want to do. If you were to do this, you would want to be very cautious about doing this, and you would want to do this for a limited period of time, because the complicated thing here is that if a student sees that they're doing work that's different from other students, they may start to then feel bad about themselves, and then we create this self-fulfilling prophecy. But in addition to that, what if their classmates realize you gave so-and-so a much easier assignment, or so-and-so only had to do half of the problems and we had to do all of them? This could easily create some issues between that student and other classmates, or between other classmates and the teacher. So I would say that this is a challenging concept to handle in the classroom. It would not be something I would do frequently. Remembering back to our lectures on different types of learners, if a student is struggling because of something like maybe a learning disability or something like that, then we might want to think about extra tutoring, or at least getting an assessment here for maybe an IEP, so maybe the least restrictive environment. If we could get a student out of the classroom for a short period of time every day to build skills one-on-one with a tutor, that could help solve this issue. All right, last few things we're going to be talking about today are who impacts motivation, first of all. What factors impact motivation? And then we're also going to talk a little bit about different types of students you might have in the classroom. So first of all, whose responsibility is it to keep a student motivated? So obviously the student has personal responsibility to maintain motivation, and you help the student stay motivated by setting goals and helping them learn strategies to achieve their goals and monitoring their progress and all of that. So teachers optimize achievement when they provide challenging tasks in a supportive environment. So we're going back to our flow idea here. We want to provide the appropriate level of challenge, but also in a supportive environment where students feel safe asking questions, where students feel safe failing and learning from failure and doing better next time. So obviously teachers are important here, and there are many different ways that teachers can motivate their students. This could be simply giving a grade. Grades are motivating. Giving some praise, some personal feedback. We've talked about different things like token economies, ways to try to motivate or reinforce good behaviors. But in addition, parents are also crucial here. I don't care what kind of education. I don't care if the parent has a child in public school, private school, homeschool, charter school, boarding school. I don't care. The parent needs to be involved in their child's education. At the very least, you have to let the child know that you care about their academic achievement. So you need to reinforce for success. You need to help students with homework, push through difficult times, and help students develop personal responsibility. There may be times where there truly is a teacher issue, but I feel like parents blaming the teachers could then cause the child to feel like he or she doesn't have to take responsibility for their own work. So there needs to be a combination of accountability here, and parents need to be held accountable as well. Now, this is part of the thing where it gets tricky, because how do we hold parents accountable for contributing to their children's education? I think, personally, if we could fix parenting and fix education, we'd be a lot better off. And I think fixing parenting would go a long way towards making education better. But once again, that's a very, very challenging thing to do. But in addition to parents and teachers, we also have peers. Now, peers can be helpful or hurtful when it comes to motivation. I have unfortunately heard of some situations where peers have bullied the students who do well in the classroom, or have made fun of students for making good grades. And so that's obviously not helpful for student achievement. But in addition to that, sometimes the competition can become excessive. So maybe a little bit of competition, a little friendly rivalry here could be okay in small amounts. Having friends who value education is important, friends who have goals that they've set for themselves. But if we end up where we're pitting one student against another student, you have to beat so-and-so, you have to have a higher score on this test, that's a hostile work environment. We don't want to create that as parents or as teachers. And if we see that happening, we have to try to find a way to diffuse that situation, because everyone is going to lose in that situation. All right, how does gender play a role in motivation? Well, research has suggested that female students and male students have different beliefs about themselves. Now, where does this come from? There's always a nature-nurture question here. So, first of all, females tend to believe that they have more competence in English, reading, and social activities than male students. Whereas male students tend to believe they have more competence in things like math and sports than female students do. Now, some of this has been borne out in the research, where we find that women usually do score a little bit higher on verbal tasks. And when it comes to things like math, a test of a basic math skill, men and women typically do about the same. But advanced math skills, men usually do outscore women a little bit there. So the question is this because of something biological that causes this, or is this something that we are teaching? So let's think about this. We know the stereotype that males do better than females on a math test. There was literally a Barbie that we sold and gave to our daughters. I don't remember when they did this, but back in the day, that had a sound chip that would say various things. And one of the things that Barbie said was, math is hard. Okay, so we know that we have implanted this belief, and we know about self-fulfilling prophecies. We also know that this can impact the way that teachers interact. So if a teacher believes that her male students or his male students will do better in math, that teacher will spend more time working with male students in math, and then therefore they will do better. On the other hand, we tend to value communication more in females. We teach girls how to talk about their feelings. We don't engage in that kind of behavior with males as much. So perhaps we are creating this. Perhaps there is a biological issue, or perhaps there is a combination. We see that male students tend to be more rambunctious. Male students are more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than female students. And that could be because it actually does happen more in males, but it could also be because males may be more likely to have the hyperactive type, which is more obvious to the teacher, whereas females are more likely to have the inattentive type, which is less obvious to the teacher. But regardless, male students do tend to receive more teacher attention, yet recently research has suggested they might receive lower grades than female students do. And this may be because some things, ADHD, some other psychological developmental issues, are more common in male students than female students, whether that be biological or whether that be maybe cultural, whatever the case may be. However, Male students tend to list more career options. They feel like they have more options for careers. There may be some careers that women feel like are not accessible to them. We may also see that female students, especially older students, may be confused about conflicts between gender roles and achievement. So we may feel like female students are not as encouraged to go into certain fields, for example. So when we're talking about career options, things like an engineer, that kind of thing, we might see as being more of male careers than female careers. And so that can then maybe cause some confusion for a female student trying to choose a direction. Female students also tend to be more compliant than male students, so maybe more likely to sit in a desk and follow directions, and perhaps because of that get less teacher attention. We also tend to see lower self-esteem in female students. This could be because of peer influences. You guys went to high school, you watched Mean Girls, right? Or you at least know what I'm talking about. Or it could be because certain internalizing psychopathology issues like depression and anxiety are more common in females. All right, last thing to see, there's a lot on this slide, but really what we're talking about here is working with students who have achievement problems. So these are just a few examples of specific achievement issues that you might see in the classroom. So you might have some students who are low achievers with low expectations. This is the student that is failing and doesn't care. It could be that the student just doesn't value education. It could be the student is not getting any encouragement at home. It could be that the student doesn't feel like he or she could do any better, so why try? Whatever the case may be, this is a student who's doing poorly in your class and they're okay with that. They don't feel like they can do better and they don't feel like they're motivated to try to do better. What can you do with this student? Well, it's going to be challenging to work with this student. It says provide reassurance and cognitive retraining. Basically, we're trying to help the student see himself or herself in a different way. Let's look at what strengths you do have. Let's talk about what changes we could make. Let's set some goals and reward the person. Now, a student who has very low expectations may need that extrinsic motivation. This may be a student who is not in it for the intrinsic rewards. I don't like school, I don't enjoy school, I'm not gonna do it just cause. So then maybe this is a situation where something like a token economy or some other kind of reinforcement could be really helpful. You may also see some students who have very high anxiety, and I think this could really start at any age. Sometimes students have high anxiety because they're just naturally anxious people. We talk about state anxiety versus trait anxiety, and your state anxiety is anxiety that's brought on by a situation, but some people have high trait anxiety where they're just nervous and twitchy all the time. I'm talking to myself here as much as I am to anybody else. So when you have a student who is anxious, this could go a couple of different ways. A student who is highly anxious may do really well in the classroom because anxiety is motivating them. However, the student might be miserable, and you might not realize that the student is struggling because the student is doing the work. Or it could be a situation where the anxiety starts harming the student's performance because it's very hard to take a test when you're freaking out. So what are we going to try to do? We're going to try to help our student have more positive thoughts about himself or herself, task-focused thoughts. So if you're anxious about a situation, there are certain ways to handle that might be more beneficial. Like if you have a test coming up and you're anxious about it, study for it. And then after you've studied for it, allow yourself to relax and not feel anxious about it anymore. Like I said earlier, a little bit of anxiety is not a bad thing. But a student who is engaging in a lot of behaviors that are not helping the anxiety, they're not making them more successful on the task, that student is probably going to get burnt out very quickly. Also, it talks about protection of self-worth by avoiding failure. So sometimes students, I've seen this play out personally, where students will not try so that if they fail, they feel like it's not their fault. Follow with me here. If you work really, really hard on a paper and then you fail that paper. That feels awful, right? So what if you then procrastinate and you don't put in the effort, you don't write it till the night before, and you don't really try, and then you fail? Well, failing is still hard, but somehow it feels easier. It feels safer to fail when you, like, well, I could have done better. I just didn't sleep. I just didn't work on it. That was my bad. I think sometimes people are afraid to put forth their best effort because failing when you really try for something and you really want something hurts more. So this could be what this looks like, this protection of self-worth, by avoiding personal failure. They feel like I tried and it didn't work for me. But this could also be that perfectionist that's going to come up again on the next slide that is terrified of failure. So helping them set realistic goals, once again, will be helpful. Strengthening the link between effort and self-worth. This is crucial. Okay, your self-worth should not be ruined by a failure. Your self-worth should, however, be impacted by your lack of trying, right? So we're trying to change the way you think about this. Instead of thinking trying and failing is the ultimate enemy, not putting in the effort is the thing we want to try to combat here, and try to encourage that and encourage positive self-perceptions. Help them see that even if they have had some experience with failure, that doesn't necessarily define them. Think back to our discussion of attribution earlier. All right, last couple things. Procrastinators and perfectionists. Maybe you fall into one of these categories. First of all, with procrastinators, some individuals have been reinforced for procrastinating. I've had some students that have told me I do my best work when I do nothing. And then a few hours before, I freak out and I drink all the coffee, and then I do it and I do my best work that way. What I want to say is, I'm glad that's worked for you so far, and that I'm glad you haven't had terrible experiences of failure. But at some point that will blow up in your face. There will be a task at some point, whether that be in high school or in undergrad or in grad school or in your career, where waiting until the last minute will come back to bite you. And so helping students see that this is eventually going to become a problem, and then just helping them figure out what the issue is with time management. And it talks about task analysis here. This may be the issue. Maybe you think this is a simple task because you haven't really looked at it hard enough. And then once you do, at 3 in the morning, with the pot of coffee on, you realize this is a more difficult, complicated task than I thought. Of course, everything is more complicated when you're sleep deprived and hopped up on caffeine. But the idea is that you need to be able to figure out ahead of time, how complex is this task? Therefore, when do I need to start doing it, and how can I have a plan to do this? How can I spread things out? Because your attention span does not like this either, trying to do everything at one time. In addition to the procrastinators, you may also see the perfectionists. If this is not you, then maybe you know someone who is a perfectionist. Now, the tricky thing about perfectionists is that they have been encouraged for this. They have been reinforced for this. It talks about identifying costs and benefits. You may be a perfectionist who then gets rewarded. You get reinforcement. You get good grades. You get good compliments from your professors. Like, what's wrong with my perfectionism? It works out well for me. But there are also costs, the anxiety and the stress, as well as time management issues here. This may be a person that feels like they have to then spend excessive time on a task because it has to be perfect. That then takes time away from other tasks that might need to be done. So you have to have a balance here. So decreasing self-criticism, because perfectionists do tend to be very hard on themselves. Set realistic goals and time limits. Maybe not giving yourself more time for a task. Maybe giving yourself less time, because as I said, perfectionists can get caught up on something being exactly right. And helping students understand that criticism in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. I will say that perfectionism is something that I have struggled with. And I will tell this story on my advisor in grad school, who, in addition to being my thesis advisor, also supervised a lot of my clinical work and taught me some classes. And I remember him telling me that he just really, really wished he could give me an F on something. And I remember thinking, okay, if you give me an F, he's like, no, not an F you earn. I just want to give you an F on something because it would be good for you. And I remember thinking, I would never work with you again if you gave me an F that I didn't deserve. But what he was trying to say is that I needed to have an experience where I failed and screwed up and then saw that the world kept turning and saw that things were okay. And later on, not in grad school, but in a different situation, I had an experience where I screwed up. I totally failed, like major fail. And I, figured out a solution, and it turned out fine. It was no problem. But I remember emailing my professor saying, you know what, you were right. I did need to fail and figure out a way to overcome failure so that I know that failure is not the end of the world. So I am not advocating for setting our students up for failure or giving them an F they don't deserve. I'm just saying that helping a student realize that we also grow from failure, not just from perfection, but we grow from our mistakes. That's an important lesson, and one that took me a really long time to learn. Excellent. All right, well, that is actually the end of this last lecture video, so please feel free to let me know if you have any questions as you are preparing for our exam. Please feel free to let me know if you have any grade questions as well. I hope that you enjoyed taking this class as much as I enjoyed teaching it, and I hope to have the opportunity to teach you guys again in the future. Have a great day.